Amina stood in the busy market and watched her husband climb into a shiny SUV with a young woman he barely tried to hide. Her chest tightened, but she did not scream. She walked straight to court and filed a restraining order that same day. She refused to be the woman who begged in front of the stalls. For 2 days she moved quietly, signing papers, gathering witnesses, and buying a transport company in secret. Then she returned with a plan everyone would remember. The convoy rolled in at dawn, municipal tow trucks at the front, a steady police escort behind them, and buses from her new company filling the street. Traders stopped selling, children stared, and phones came out. She stepped down from the lead bus with the judge's papers in her hand and the keys to the SUV. Officers served the order, drivers hooked the car to a tow truck, and the boutique he owned was closed and sealed under official notice. People who once whispered looked at him openly now. He tried to speak but no one listened. Amina walked the market lane with calm steps, counting the cost of dignity with every look she took. Vendors peeked from doorways, phones came out, and his boutique doors were chained shut as the crowd cheered loudly. By the time the convoy left, she had not only taken back a car and a shop, she had shown the town that betrayal would meet consequence and that she would rise without hiding. Zola watched Tendai walk out of their flat with a woman on his arm and felt the world tilt, but she did not shout or chase. She stood very still, then went home, packed one small bag, and quietly handed in her resignation at the office where mornings had become a slow ache. She told no one the real reason. For days she sat with a notebook and a cheap phone and made a plan so clean it had no loose ends. She sold a few things, called an old friend who knew trucks, and put together the money to buy a small logistics company. While everyone else expected a sad wife, Zola moved like a calm storm, meeting lawyers, signing papers, learning routes, and hiring drivers. In secret she rented 20 sturdy trucks and hired a radio crew that could turn any small moment into big news. She practiced what she would say, but mostly she planned how to make the truth impossible to hide. 1 week after Tendai left, she rose before dawn and led the convoy back into town. The trucks rumbled like a steady heartbeat and the radio van blared her message across the streets. They parked to block the road by the guest house where Tendai thought he could hide. Drivers locked their engines and the hamlet of sleepy shop owners woke to a new kind of noise. The radio host climbed on top of the van and told the simple facts: who left, who stayed, and how the town could watch what happens when promises are broken. Phones came out. People gathered. Tendai's face went white when he saw the line of trucks and the microphone aimed at him. He tried to slip past, but the convoy held firm. The radio crew streamed live and the sound of Zola's name spread like a signal flare. She walked up with firm steps, not angry in a loud way but steady, and told her truth into the microphone. She did not swear or cry. She spoke clear, short sentences about betrayal, about choices, and about how she had chosen to stop being small. The crowd listened, and the morning papers that day ran her picture across the front page. The guest house owner, embarrassed and cornered, closed the curtains. Tendai had no story to sell, and the woman he had fled with hid her face. By noon the town had retold Zola's story in market corners and on buses. What started as a private cut became public reckoning. Zola did not celebrate cruelty. She reclaimed her name, her life, and the space he had tried to erase. The 20 trucks drove away at dusk, leaving behind a town that knew a quiet woman could, in a single week, turn a private shame into a public moment and walk out stronger. Amara sat on her small porch and watched the video again, not because she could change it, but because she needed the truth to feel solid. The clip was short, shaky, and clear enough. Her husband, the man she had trusted, was laughing with a woman who was not her in a cafe they both knew. Her hands trembled, then she breathed and made a choice. She did not shout or smash things. She copied the file, sent it to a few trusted friends, and then posted it where the town could not ignore it. People opened the link and the chat filled with questions. Some called her, some came by, and some whispered in the market. Amara knew that anger alone would not help, so she turned pain into a plan that would lift others and also make the truth visible. She used her savings to hire a small fleet of charity vans, bought food, medicine, and blankets, and signed papers to register a day of aid. She told no one about the wife part of the story. What she announced was a free distribution for elderly neighbors and families who were struggling. On the morning she returned, the convoy moved quietly into the neighborhood where his new girlfriend liked to walk. The vans were bright, the volunteers wore smiles, and the crates were heavy with real help. People lined up for food and medicine, and word spread fast. The new girlfriend watched from the roadside, first curious, then uncomfortable as the crowd grew. Amara walked the line handing out parcels and greeting people by name. She stood where everyone could see her, calm and steady. Then a woman who had received a blanket began to chant Amara's name, at first one voice, then 10, then a whole block. The chant was simple and small, it was gratitude that turned into a sound that filled the street. Faces that had been quiet before now watched the man who had thought he could hide. He came out, flustered, and tried to speak, but the crowd called for honesty. Cameras from small shops and 2 local journalists recorded him as he fumbled words. The woman at his side moved back and covered her face. The pressure built not from shaming for its own sake, but from the fact that the community had seen the truth and chosen the one who offered help, not the one who caused hurt. Faced with that, he apologized in public, his voice small against the chorus of thank yous and Amara's quiet nods. She accepted the apology not as victory, but as a closure she had earned. When the vans left, people waved, the volunteers loaded the leftover crates, and Amara walked away knowing she had given food and a clear lesson: when betrayal is met with dignity and action, the crowd will stand with the one who gives. Neka stood on the dusty porch and watched the car that used to be their life drive away with his hurried hands on the wheel. She held the empty key ring and felt the hot sting of being left behind, but she did not cry in the street. She walked into the house, locked the door, and made a quiet plan. She called a lawyer, met a silent investor she trusted, and within hours a calm network of people started to move. While neighbors guessed she would sit and mourn, she sold a few personal things, signed contracts, and hired a small army of contractors. She did not shout about revenge. She focused on one clear goal: take the place that had been his pride and make it hers. Within a day the contractors arrived with tools and trucks. Workers measured the showroom, painted new signs, and changed the display windows. A security motorcade of 2 armored cars and private guards rolled up at dawn to make sure no one blocked the work. The man who owned the showroom came back thinking he had left a tidy business behind. He found chains on the office door and a legal notice pinned on the wall. He called, begged, and tried to force his way in. The notice was simple and firm. The investor had legal papers ready. The contractor crews worked through the night. Neka walked the floor in work boots, pointing where new shelves would go and choosing the light that made the product look strong. Within 48 hours the front of the building had new lettering with her name on it, new staff at the counter wearing shirts with her logo, and a reception desk that said she was the manager now. The showroom windows showed a different story. He stood across the street with his face white, watching customers come in and nod at Neka as if she had always been the owner. She did not parade him or humiliate him with loud words. Instead she turned the business into something useful, hired people who needed work, and put up a sign that read, in plain letters, "Open for business." People who once praised him began to whisper that the woman who was left had done more than wait. She had built. When he tried to make a scene, the security team gently guided him away and told him the matter was in court. Cameras on shop roofs filmed his small protests. Neka stood by the new counter and watched a family walk in, look around, and leave with a receipt that had her name printed on it. She breathed out for the first time in days, not because she punished him, but because she had turned loss into control. The showroom now belonged to her in fact and in the eyes of the neighborhood. He had the memory of the keys. She had the keys to a future she had made with her head, her hands, and a silent promise that she would not be erased. Sephu left on a sunny afternoon, smiling like he had won something, and a younger woman sat beside him as if the world had changed for him overnight. Lara watched the car go and felt a hollow pull in her chest, but she did not run after it or make a scene. She went home, made a cup of tea, and then sat down with a quiet, steady plan. She sold a few items she did not need, used her savings, and reached out to friends who knew how apps worked. She learned enough about design and drivers to know what riders want. She found small investors who liked her clear promise, safe rides, fair pay for drivers, and dignity for passengers. They gave her enough money to build a simple app and to brand a small fleet of cars. For months she worked without noise. She hired a few drivers who needed honest work. She trained them, gave them codes to follow, and taught them to treat every passenger with respect. She built her brand around trust, not glamour. Then she launched. The app grew slowly, then faster, because people told friends about clean cars, polite drivers, and fair prices. Investors who believed in her values grew bolder. They offered to back a larger move that would also change the local business map. Months after Sefu left, Lara returned to the city not as a hurt woman but as the CEO of a new ride service. She led a convoy of branded cars down the main boulevard, each car neat, each driver in a shirt with the company name. A live radio crew rode in the lead van and streamed the convoy so the city could watch. The cars rolled past the salon where Sefu's partner had worked and the crowd turned to look. Investors in the convoy stepped out and made an announcement about buying a stake in the salon chain tied to his partner. The broadcast named facts and showed company logos, and the salon's owners listened as their future changed before their eyes. The younger woman watched from the curb, her face shrinking as cameras pointed toward her. Sefu stepped out too, surprised and small against the line of neat cars and calm people. Lara spoke into the microphone with clear, quiet words. She did not shout accusations. She told the truth about starting over and about building something people needed. She let the work speak. The convoy drove on, leaving a buzz in the market and headlines that people repeated on buses and at stalls. By the end of the day the city had a new story. A woman who was left had come back as a leader, steady and real, and the world around her began to change to match the life she chose to build. Chioma watched from the sidewalk as her husband climbed into a car with a woman from his office and drove away, and for a moment the street tilted under her feet, but she did not run after them or cry out. She held herself steady, walked back to the small house, and did one quiet thing after another. She filed papers to register a protest so her voice would be official. She called a lawyer and asked for help. She hired a media truck and a small legal team, and she rehearsed what she would say. She did not want a scene of shouting. She wanted the truth to be seen and recorded. On the morning she chose, the convoy arrived before the hotel staff opened the gates. The media truck was loud but orderly. Legal cars parked in a line to block the entrance so no one could slip out. The protesters she had invited stood with signs that said simple things like truth and respect, not insults. Cameras rolled as lawyers carried subpoenas and official papers toward the hotel. Voices spoke clearly into microphones. People gathered at the edges of the road and phones came out. The hotel doors stayed shut for a moment, and then the couple emerged, surprised to find the road full of witnesses. Chioma walked up to the lead microphone with calm steps, not to shout but to say the facts as they were. She spoke about the papers, about the need for accountability, and about why people should not be lied to. The legal team handed the subpoenas to the man and the woman. A lawyer read the order out loud so everyone could hear. The cameras followed every reach of a hand. What started as a private hurt had turned into a public moment where rules were enforced and promises were checked. The procession felt like a moving court because subpoenas were served on the spot and questions were recorded under open sky. The woman from his office tried to speak, but the camera kept rolling and her answers sounded small against the steady questions from the reporters. Chioma did not gloat. She stayed composed and let the law do its work. She let the words of lawyers and the sight of papers do what anger alone could not. As the day went on, the story reached radio stations and social feeds. People debated. Some came to watch in person, others listened from homes. The man who had thought he could hide found his choices written into official documents and pressed into the record of the city. By evening the convoy left the hotel, but not quietly. The images had already spread. Chioma walked away with her head up because she had used order, witnesses, and public truth to make a private hurt visible. She did not destroy anyone. She used rules and cameras to hold them to account, and in doing so she took back her power with calm, clear steps that people still talked about days later. Amy stood on her doorstep and watched the car go with the man she loved and a younger woman laughing in the back. Her heart broke, but she did not let it show to the street. She walked into the town hall the next morning and asked for a permit. She would not shout or throw things. She wanted something that would make people stop and think. The permit was small paper, but it let her plan a parade on the street in front of the woman's apartment. She called cooks she knew, teachers from the local school, market women, and a few elders who still listened when they spoke. She told them she wanted to give food to the families who needed it, and also to ask the town to stand for respect and for fair treatment. No one expected the scale of what she would do. In secret she borrowed a few folding tables, found old music speakers, and hired 3 food trucks to bring warm meals. Volunteers painted signs that said things like respect and restore, not mean words or insults. On the day she picked, the convoy arrived like a bright promise. Food trucks rolled up, elders walked with canes and smiles, and community leaders came with their small flags. The street filled with color and the smell of stewed rice and beans. People from the neighborhood lined up, not to stare but to eat and to talk. The woman in the apartment watched from the balcony at first. She thought it was a small crowd, but then she saw the banners, the families, the radio van that played a calm song between short speeches. Amy walked slowly through the line, passing plates to children and shaking hands with older women who had worked at the market for years. She spoke with clear, soft words about what it meant to take care of each other and why respect mattered in every home and shop. The crowd began to clap, then sing, and soon a simple chant rose that said her name and then the word respect. Phones came out and someone started a short live stream. The clip spread by noon, and people in other neighborhoods repeated the chant. The parade felt less like revenge and more like a community choosing which life it would honor. The man who had left came down to watch and found himself surrounded by neighbors who knew now that choices have weight. The younger woman closed her window and could not look away. The local radio read the brief story that evening and the clip hit morning feeds the next day. What started as Amy's quiet plan became a small movement about dignity. People who came for a meal stayed for a talk, and children learned that you can answer hurt with service instead of shame. When the trucks rolled away, the street was cleaner than before and the banners were taken down to be used at the school. Amy walked home tired and steady. She had not made a scene of cruelty. She had given food, gathered witnesses, and turned a private hurt into a public lesson about respect. The next morning market talk was different. People did not mock. They asked how they could help the next food convoy. Ruth watched Jabari drive off with a grin and a woman at his side and felt the ground shift, but she did not cry in the street or call for pity. She went home, breathed, and made a plan that would not let him hide. Quietly she met a few people she trusted, called an old contact at a local NGO, and arranged backing from community leaders who owed her favors. She hired a legal advisor and a small team to check records. While everyone expected a scene of wailing, Ruth moved with calm work. In a few days she had permits, vehicles, and reporters ready. On the morning she chose, a glossy convoy arrived at the edge of the neighborhood. NGO cars with placards drove in first, followed by dignitary escorts that made people stop and notice, and then press vans that opened like boxes of light. They parked on the street in a neat line right by Jabari's gate. Cameras pointed, microphones clicked, and a small crowd gathered fast. Ruth stepped forward in plain clothes, no loud words, only a clear voice. She called a short press conference there on his doorstep and asked simple questions that needed simple answers. The legal team handed out copies of documents that showed debts Jabari had hidden, signed guarantees he had ignored, and bills he had thought would never leave the drawer. The reporters read them out loud and the crowd murmured. Jabari came out pale and stumbling, and the camera hones in on every face. He tried to explain, but the proof was on paper and on record. People with phones recorded his excuses and the press van streamed his stammering live. Ruth did not gloat. She spoke about responsibility, about the cost of choices, and about what it meant to owe more than apologies. The crowd watched as he asked for mercy. They filmed him, not to humiliate for pleasure, but to make visible what he had tried to hide. By midday his promises felt thin against the stack of papers and the steady questions from the reporters. When the convoy left, Ruth walked back through the small crowd with her head level. She had not broken him with anger. She had used law, witnesses, and public truth to hold him to account. The neighborhood talked about that day for weeks as the moment when a private betrayal was met with clear consequence and public reckoning.